Well, for anyone paying attention, it's obvious that America is experiencing tremendous upheaval. The question is, what is the church going to do about it? We'll talk about that today with Eric Metaxas. He's the #1 New York Times bestselling author of Bonhoeffer and many, many other books. You may have heard him on his podcast, Socrates in the City, or the nationally syndicated Eric Metaxas radio show. Now, one of his latest books, which has been made into a movie, is titled Letter to the American Church. It's a powerful wake-up call for us to avoid the mistakes that the German church made in the 1930s. Eric Metaxas, welcome to the Stand Radio.
Well, it's a joy to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Eric, at what point did you think this book has got to be written? And what makes this different from your other books?
I've absolutely never had this experience happen before. I've written many, many books, and I know the Lord is with me and called me to write them, but I never had an experience. There's two things, actually. Never had an experience where I felt this burning passion, like the Lord is calling me to speak this message. I never had that before. I can't really explain it, but it was just like this, you hear people talk about this, it's like you feel this pregnancy, like I've got to get this out. I've got to get this out. This is an act of obedience to the Lord. He wants me to say this. And so it's a kind of a pressure, but at the same time, it kind of lets you off the hook because you say, okay, Lord, if you want to say this, I'm just going to try to get out of the way. And related to that is the idea that every book that I've written for everybody. Every book I've written, I'm hoping is going to be read by pagans and agnostics and everybody, not this book. This book is the only book I ever wrote that I knew God wanted me to write it for the church. So anybody who calls himself a Christian, this is for them. And of course, the film, which is out, it's the same title, Letter to the American Church. It's the same thing. This is for people who say, yeah, I'm a Christian. It's like, okay, you're a Christian. Well, please listen to this because I think this is urgent.
Well, there's so much to say in the book, so much that you have to say. We want to extend our condolences to you and your family on the recent death of your father. And I understand that he and your mother both influenced the book Letter to the American Church. Could you explain how?
Well, sure. It's really kind of fascinating because I have a Letter to the American Church is the new book, but I have a sequel coming out very soon called Religionless Christianity. And in a way, the whole point is that sometimes we who are inside the church, we get overly religious and we forget that truth is truth. There's no such thing as Christian truth. It's either truth or it's not. And if it is truth, it is from God. And I think that, I was raised in a home, it was not evangelical Christians, but my parents knew the difference between good and evil, between freedom and slavery. And because they grew up, my dad grew up in Greece, where the communists tried to take over after World War II. He was there. He saw it. My mother grew up in Germany, which was Nazi Germany, which my Bonhoeffer book comes out of that.
Right.
But then the Soviets took over East Germany, and she grew up in East Germany. So she saw communism up close. So both my parents raised me to know the evil of communism. They were not fooled. They had seen it. They had lived it. And they knew it was evil. And I think there are many Christians in America that we've been so blessed, we forget about the evilness of evil. And we kind of act like, well, I just want to have a nice church life and a nice prayer time. And it's like, no. Jesus died on the cross to defeat evil and death. And we have been so blessed in this country that we really forget there's evil. And I think we've been seeing it in the last few years where you kind of realize, wait a minute, there is evil. Things can go very, very wrong. But I realized that my being aware of this idea of evil came from my parents because they experienced it. I mean, look, they experienced hunger, they experienced war, and then they saw the evil of communism. So it really helped me to see these things so that really when I wrote my Bonhoeffer book, I was thinking, could this happen in America? This happened in Germany. Well, I'll tell you, the Germans didn't see it coming, and they were just like we are. In 1933, they never dreamt where it was going, and therefore the church was silent. They said, this is not our job. We're just going to do church. So it's really horrifying to see the church be silent in the face of evil, thinking they're doing the right and religious thing, and the reality is they're not. Bonhoeffer tried to wake them up. So I saw the parallels so dramatically in recent years in America, in the American church. I said, this is why God wants me to speak to this. We have drifted away from the truth. We're not aware of it, and we have to wake up and course correct yesterday because the hour is very, very late.
You have done so much research into the book Bonhoeffer and into the current book. What are some of the similarities that you've come across between the church in America today and the German church that existed in the 1930s?
Well, part of it I just mentioned. It's really an inability to see evil, to kind of act like, well, we've moved past that. We don't have evil. We're sophisticated. Everything's pretty good, and we're just trying to make it a little bit better. It's like, no, Jesus didn't die to make your marriage and your career a little bit better. He died to defeat evil and death. And I think that when you're very blessed, as Germany was, in the early part of the 20th century, and as America has been for decades, you forget that is what God calls his church to do, to stand against evil. Do we understand that he's called us to be warriors, spiritual warriors between good and evil? I really think that we have been so blessed that we really are like the German church in the early 30s, that when Hitler comes onto the scene, they don't recognize what is happening. They kind of think, well, okay, he's going to be a one-term, Führer, how bad you get. And they did not act. And I think that we have the same complacence and passivity in the American church. And really, it's also a theological issue where people kind of act like, well, I'm not called to politics. I'm just going to stay in my church lane. Yeah. That's nonsense. The church is always called to come out of the church building and into every single sphere in the culture, to bring God's values into politics, into culture, into education, into medicine, into the courts, everywhere. That is our job. And the Lord calls us to do it, and he depends on us to do it. The church is supposed to be salt and light everywhere. And I think that sometimes that comes with a cost. It always comes with a cost. And some people have shrunk back and said, I don't need to do that. The culture is Christian enough. I guess, we're okay. And that is really taking for granted the blessings we have. It all comes with a price. And so the Germans missed it because of the same theological misunderstanding. They said, well, we're just going to do church. We're a Christian nation. We don't need to get too radical. That's a part of it. And what comes alongside of that is this idea that I have an excuse. I don't need to be involved in politics. And even finding theological excuses to avoid politics, those are mistakes. But people have theological reasons, and they think that those are correct, and they go with it until they see, oops, it's a mistake.
Eric, you write about how most of the pastors in Germany, about 2/3 of the 12,000 there, did nothing in those years prior to the Holocaust. Now, drawing the parallel to America today, where are we on that timeline, and how much time do you think we have left?
Well, I am very, very blunt about this. We have literally like a year. This is not a 5-year thing, like let's take it slow. We have taken it slow, and we are at the edge of the precipice. We're going over the precipice. If we don't wake up now, it's over. I mean, I think that people who really understand religious liberty is under attack in America, and that's, a fancy word for liberty. Liberty is under attack. And when liberty is under attack, what does that mean? It means you lose the ability to fight back. Mm-hmm. In other words, in a free country, you have the ability to go to a court of law and to get a fair judgment. That is going away. Today, we know that we have a two-tier justice system. Some people will get justice and some people won't. Some people will have a chance and some people won't. That's one example. The madness of open borders, strangers flooding in, Chinese nationals, young men. This is not families. This is tons of people flooding in, and we have a government looking the other way. But worse than that, you have Christians saying, that's not my job, that's politics. Well, shame on you, Christian, because that is your job. According to God, that is your job. It's your job to care about, children that are being sex trafficked across our border, fentanyl that's pouring in and ripping apart American families, and on and on and on and on. This is the job of the church, to care about this stuff. And so this evil that is arising around us, the only good news is I think it is waking some people up. When I talk about this, if I talked about this 3 years ago, people say, well, I don't know. Well, now you know. Churches have been shut down. And many, many pastors and Christian leaders have advocated and continue to advocate, well, don't be political, don't be divisive. And I think we're not dealing with Tip O'Neill and Jimmy Carter. We're dealing with Marxist atheism that is at war, not just with our Christian values, with American values, with fundamental American values, with the existence of America. You have globalists, I write about this in the new book, Religionless Christianity, globalists trying to wipe away national sovereignty in our country, trying to say that we need to cede control to these, World Health Organization, which is effectively China, and we need to erase our southern border. Honestly, all of this is not just going to weaken America, but it's going to destroy the world, because America is, in the words of Lincoln, the last best hope of earth. God has established this country for his purposes, not for our purposes. Yeah. And we have been in many ways, a voice for God's purposes in history, for liberty, and a lot of people have forgotten that. So there's a lot here, but the main issue is to the church, this is your job. It is our job to stand, to get involved. And, the film Letter to the American Church, I think, makes that case. I think my book makes the case as well. And I should say there's a website, lettertotheamericanchurch.com. Any church that wants to do a free screening, free, 100% free, we want to get the message out to churches in particular. It's called Letter to the American Church. So you can go to lettertotheamericanchurch.com, sign up for a free screening. You can see where there are free screenings all around the country. It's become a movement. Yeah. And obviously, if people want to buy the DVD or see the film or get the book, we can get that at lettertotheamericanchurch.com. But it is utterly free to any church that would like to do a screening.
Yeah, we want our listeners to check out that website. Once again, lettertotheamericanchurch.com. You can fill out the form for a free church screening. You can stream it yourself there on the platform. You can get DVDs in 5 and 10 packs, and there's also a great list of action points there. We'll put that link on our podcast page. Eric, are we going through a period of spiritual apathy when you look at the church, or is there a deliberate attempt by some to actually spread Marxism within the church?
Oh, the two go together. I mean, we've been going through a period of apathy in the church because, again, we're so spoiled. We have no idea how bad it can get. And again, because my mom and dad grew up, in a different part of the world, they know it can get horrifying, wicked, evil. Most of the world knows that. But Americans, we've been incredibly blessed and spoiled. And so we've been apathetic, and we've allowed cultural Marxists, atheists, leftists, secularists to flood the zone. And we are now in a culture that it is everywhere. It is in the churches. Many churches have opened the door to cultural Marxism and critical theory and all this stuff, which is at odds with God, with God's word, with God's principles. But they have been, what's a nice word? Suckers, basically. Okay. They have said, well, we're being inclusive. You're opening the door to hell. You're not opening the door to the downtrodden, and you need to be aware of that. And so I think that, enough people are waking up that I have hope, but it's not enough yet. Let me be clear that we're in a war, and if enough churches don't wake up, just like in Germany, not enough woke up in time. And at some point, the evil wins, and you're done. You're tied down with ropes. You can't move. That is what is happening in this nation. Every day there are attacks on liberty and law and everything. If we, the church, don't wake up to this and do what we can, it is over. And the Lord will blame us. We're the ones that claim to be fearless servants of the Most High God.
You actually use the phrase that America is in a midst of a holy moment. Is that what you mean by that, the time being short?
Well, what I think is, I say this is the hour of the American church. This is the moment where if the American church will rise to be the church, not to say I go to church, not to say I belong to a church, but if you claim to be a Christian, you're the church. And if the church will be the church and live out our faith the way, the martyrs did, the way people do who are Christians in China today, in places where your faith is not allowed. People are living heroically. If the American church would live courageously in that way, we could turn the world around. We could turn the world upside down. We could turn this nation around. We have been drifting, and the Lord is calling us to repent and to act and to speak. I do believe that enough are waking up, that if more wake up in time, we have the ability to turn this around. I call it the third existential crisis of our history, and that's in the new book. Letter to the American Church is the book we're talking about, but the book coming out, which is the sequel, is called Religionless Christianity, and I say this is the third existential crisis of our history, where you have the revolution, you have the Civil War, and where we are now, we will cease to exist if we do not prevail, if we do not call on the Lord, if we do not act. And so this is the moment. Will the church rise to this occasion? Many are, but not enough yet. And so anybody who hears my voice, you could literally be you're the tipping point. You're the one that changes things if you will obey God and enter the fray to his glory, ask him how he wants to use you, and be willing to do it. And it's the greatest joy in the world to be used by God for his purposes.
Could you tell us who's in the film, Eric, and specifically why you chose to include them in their areas of expertise?
Well, as I mentioned, I wrote the book Letter to the American Church. I didn't make the film. I'm in the film. I mean, the film is based on my book. But two women in Hollywood, they saw me preach at a church in California, and they said, this needs to be a film, and they're all in for God's purposes. And so they said, let's make a film. They were the ones that had the idea. Obviously, I'm the central figure, but to interview people that are experts on all these different issues. So we have our friend Charlie Kirk is prominent in the film. James Lindsay, he's an expert on critical theory and on cultural Marxism. Amazing job that he does explaining things. Pastor Rob McCoy, my pastor in New York, David Engelhardt of the King's Church in New York. We have Victor Marx and his wife Eileen Marx are in the film, and one of my favorites is John Amanchukwu. John Amanchukwu, what a hero. He's a pastor in North Carolina, and he goes to school board meetings, and he reads these vile texts that they have in the school libraries at the school board meetings to shame the school board, saying this is what is available to children in this school district, and you object to me reading it in a school board meeting. This is pornographic stuff that he is trying to tell them. You're allowing these books, this sexualization of children, and on and on and on and on. There's so much stuff like that in the film that you want to cheer that there are people out there doing this and exhorting others to do it. If more would do it, if more would go to the school board meetings, and more would take their kids out of the public schools, more, there's everywhere you look, there's something each of us can do. That's the call, to be God's voice at this time, to stand against evil. Bonhoeffer tried to get the German church to be that at the time. They said, no, thank you. And by the time they woke up, it was too late. So this is the question for the American church. Will we wake up now? Because I think it is almost too late. We don't have a few years. We have this year, essentially, to turn the corner.
Wow. Once again, the website, lettertotheamericanchurch.com. We're talking to Eric Metaxas about his book and the subsequent film, Letter to the American Church. Last question, Eric. In addition to encouraging pastors to download the film and to share it in their churches, what do you hope people overall will do when they've read the book and seen the film?
Well, I think I keep saying it's become part of a movement in a sense, because the book Letter to the American Church, originally I was going to title it Faith Without Works is Dead. When you say you believe and don't live it out, he knows you don't really believe it. And we've kind of allowed ourselves to believe that it's just what's in my head, it's some theological stuff. We're supposed to live out our faith. So the goal of the book, Letter to the American Church, and the sequel, Religionless Christianity, and the goal of the film is to awaken the church that this is what God wants us to do. So to become part of a movement and to hang out with people that are like-minded, to say, what can we do in our community? What can we do to make sure we have a fair election this fall? Otherwise, we're sliding off the abyss into lawlessness, into confusion, or we don't even trust our institutions. So it's really about awakening the church, and every single person has a different role. Not everybody's supposed to is called to the same thing, but to awaken people to this idea that, yes, the Lord expects me to put my faith into action. That was Bonhoeffer's phrase, faith in action.
Yes.
That is something we've let drift away, and we need to understand today. I need to ask God, what do you want me to do? Not just to believe, but to live out my faith and act in an active way right now in history.
Wow. Powerful word for the church today. The website, once again, lettertotheamericanchurch.com. Check that out today. Sign up for a free screening, look at the film, get the book, and share this with those around you. Eric, thanks so much for waking the church up today, and thanks for your time today.
It's my privilege. Thanks so much.
Well, that's it for this edition of The Stand Radio. You can hear today's show again as a podcast at afr.net. And for a free 6-month subscription to The Stand magazine with all kinds of articles on culture, faith, and family, just visit afa.net/The Stand. I'm Jeff Shamley. It's been great to be with you today. Join us next time here on The Stand Radio.